I have played many survival horror games, ranging all from modern games like the recent Resident Evil remakes, to old PS1 stuff like Hell Knight or Galarians that no one knows, and although many have been exceptionally good like the Resident Evil remake or Signalis, no game was quite perfect. So how would the perfect survival horror game look for me? I mean, not like anybody cares, but still, here we go. Starting with the setting, I would go for something like Dino Crisis 2. For some reason, horror with dinosaurs is pretty much my favorite thing in any media, although there's barely any of that sadly. Like I said in my Dino Crisis video, I missed a bit of outside areas in Dino Crisis 1, which were then added in Dino Crisis 2. And although it's great, I would have loved to see that setting in a proper survival horror game. Additionally, I would absolutely love something like the nighttime atmosphere with rain in, for example, Jurassic Park 1 and 3. Because I honestly enjoyed it so damn much, I have no idea why, but it's better than anything else. And if anyone at Capcom sees this, which probably won't be the case, please make a Dino Crisis remake. I will happily kill for that, so text me if you want to get rid of somebody. Also small shout out to Compound Fracture. It's an indie game which hasn't released yet, but it looks really cool and I'm looking forward to it a lot. I mean, it has dinosaurs and PS1 aesthetics. Hell yeah. But how can we see the damn setting? Exactly, with our eyes. But not only that, but also with graphics. I apologize to any game developer because that sentence must have been pain for you for sure. But anyway, it's just you. For this aspect, I don't really have that one perfect imagination, but in the end it has to look good and work well with the rest of the game. Obviously extremely realistic graphics, like in the recent Resident Evil games or the Silent Hill 2 remake, would work very well, if the necessary budget is given. Otherwise, something like the low poly pixelated style of Signalis or even as low as PS1 visuals could work and look stunning as well. The only style of graphics I dislike, if you can even call it like that, are these cheap looking indie games that aim to look realistic, but don't achieve that because they don't have the budget. An example is Tormented Souls. And although I like the game very much, it suffered visually from having quite shit looking character models and animations, while the rest looked fantastic. It's not a deal breaker, but distracting, and it hurts the visual appearance of the game. For example, Alisa, which is just a PS1 style game, doesn't have that problem. It doesn't look hyper realistic or shiny reflections, but it's consistent, it fits the setting, and it looks good. But yeah, because we are talking about my perfect survival horror game, please just make it look consistently good and fitting. Seriously, nothing is more disappointing than a good game that is getting held back by bad, distracting graphics. But do you know what's also disappointing? The number of people that aren't subscribed to the channel, even though they watch my videos. So if you're one of these, please subscribe if you enjoyed this video so far. Thank you, but let's continue. Talking about graphics, we also have to talk about the perspective. A topic that is always discussed, let's say, very engaged. I think many remember the discussions surrounding Resident Evil 7 and how it's not a real Resident Evil game because of the first person perspective. Which is in my opinion dog shit, but anyway. Or the discussions if a proper survival horror game has to have fixed camera angles, because otherwise it's just action. Anyway, that was kinda a long intro to that part, especially because I don't care too much about the perspective anyway, similar to the graphics. In general, they just need to fit and be executed perfectly. But if I had to choose, I would probably go for fixed camera angles. Or more specific, these dynamic camera angles from Code Veronica and Dino Crisis, because they look pretty damn cool and cinematic. I, for my part, also feel very immersed in these kinda games because you just soak in so much of the atmosphere. And contrary to that, I think the top-down perspective in games like Signalis or even Darkwood wouldn't work great with the dinosaurs because they are just too big to fit easily, so I wouldn't opt for that. But I guess with talented people that could still work, but it wouldn't be my first choice. But in the end, the most important thing is that they aren't annoying or look cheap, because especially some indie games have bad fixed camera angles or stiff third-person cameras, similar to how the graphics of these can sometimes be inconsistent. Another thing that is often inconsistent or cheap in horror games is the voice acting. And I have to say, for a proper survival horror game I want good voice acting. Something like the first Resident Evil is funny, but ultimately not scary or immersive, and although the game is massively enjoyable, the voice acting arguably hurts the horror part of the game.
Close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
But that doesn't mean that I don't like some cheesy dialogue. For example, I love this line in Dino Crisis,
That's disgusting.
or even stuff like the fourth wall break in Silent Hill 3.
Too gross. Who would even think of doing something so disgusting?
I have to admit though that I'm not the biggest fan of just text boxes like in Signalis or Silent Hill Orphan, which I recently reviewed, so check it out. Because they just don't really do it for me, to be honest. The last aspect that is important for the atmosphere is the soundtrack. And I can say instantly that I wouldn't want just ambient sounds like in the recent Resident Evil games. I love a good soundtrack that is also prominent at all times. I'm not a musician, so I can't say too much about this, but obviously it has to fit, and I will probably go for something like Dino Crisis in terms of music. It just has a wide range of clinical, horrifying, but also exciting music that really contributes to the experience. And for some reason that sentence sounded like it was written by AI. But yeah, like I said, I have to admit I can't say much about this aspect without repeating what I already said. So let's get to the gameplay. For me, the gameplay is the most important part of any game. A good setting is important to get people interested in a game, but no one is gonna play it if it isn't fun. And even though horror games are always meant to be stressful, which kinda contradicts the fun part, they should always be a joy to play as well. And I'm not gonna plan out the whole game here, so don't worry, but unsurprisingly, it has to be rewarding, satisfying, and almost most importantly, not frustrating. And even though these sound kinda obvious, there are still many horror games that are just not fun, because they ignore that it has to be fun in favor of being more hardcore and more horror. For example, many games with limited inventory get frustrating because of too few inventory slots, like Resident Evil 0 or even Signalis depending on who you ask. Of course you are supposed to only take the most important things with you, and I totally get that and I'm not criticizing that. But sometimes it just gets that tiny bit too much. But to get to a point now, I will probably go for 6 normal slots and then maybe an extra slot or 2 for stuff like a headlight or radio, depending on what items exist in the game. Because it's just frustrating if basic items take up space for no freaking reason. Another part that can get frustrating are puzzles. And this is a hard topic, and to be honest, I'm sure as hell happy that I don't have to deal with that. It's just hard or even impossible to balance a puzzle so that everyone is able to solve it. I personally like puzzles that simply aren't too hard, and I don't mean that I want something like the jokes in the original Resident Evil 4 that are lovable easy, but I remember that stuff in Tormented Souls was just a bit too much for its own good. It's not fun being stuck at a puzzle for over an hour because the solution is something completely abstract that no one would even think of. I like puzzles that just involve some decent normal thinking, but that also present a hint in the same room or at least in the near area. I don't want the solution printed out, but the most satisfying thing is when you just need maybe 5 minutes to solve it before you can carry on with the game. But yeah, like I said, it's just hard to balance, but in my dream world, it would have some magically perfect puzzles that are doable for everyone and fun to solve. In the end, it's just important to keep up a nice flow without frustration. Doesn't matter if it's puzzles, some fighting against enemies, or even just a basic key item hunt. Another important part is the combat, that I will probably just copy from early Resident Evil games if it's a fixed camera angle game, or from modern Resident Evil game if it's a first or third person game. Honestly, they just do everything right. It's satisfying, simple and fun. For example, the combat in Signalis or Silent Hill is sometimes just annoying and frustrating because of weird controls or lack of feedback, and that is mostly avoided in Resident Evil. So yeah, I just want the same. Thanks. I also want to mention that I really like how overpowered you get at the end of Resident Evil games. It's just nice being able to blast away enemies that were once strong and scary. The key item hunt and progression is something that I will copy from Resident Evil as well. In particular, probably from the first Resident Evil and its remake. I managed to have the amazing mansion that is fun to explore, while the rest of the game features some changes in pace. For example, the sewers are very short and straightforward, while the lab after that returns to a similar pace to the beginning of the mansion again, while still being a bit different. It just works. At last, I would probably go for a save system with stationary save stations, like most horror games, but without unnecessary item like ink ribbons, at least for everything but the hardest difficulty. I also talked about this more with Shin0555 in the first episode of Textbox on our channel, so check that out if you want to hear more about this. So what else is there to say? My perfect survival horror game will be a lot like Dino Crisis, but also with some additional Jurassic Park and Signalis and even more Resident Evil, to somehow make the perfect, most satisfying and fun horror game that is somehow also scary. So not a big task, but to get serious again, please share in the comments how your perfect survival horror game will look like, and please share, subscribe and comment if you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching and see you next time.